webinar on a fortnightly basis on clinical topics and non-clinical topics. We have conducted webinars on diabetes and COVID-19 and developing research questions in the past. We plan to come up with the webinars on cardiology and CKD in future. The aim of this activity is to update your knowledge, enhance your daily practice, and improve the quality of care that you provide to your patients. With this, now let us begin with the webinar. Our speaker for today will focus on palliative care in COVID times. We would be addressing your questions at the end of the session, so requesting you to write your questions in the question and answer box along with your name and city. We would try our best to address your questions during the webinar. Please note that this webinar will also be recorded and you will be able to watch it later. A link to the webinar will be provided to you. Feel free to share it with your colleagues and among your network. Now we would like to start with the session and I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Naveen Salins. Dr. Naveen Salins needs no introduction as he is a renowned name in palliative care. Dr. Naveen Salins is Professor and Head, Department of Palliative Medicine and Supportive Care, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Dr. Naveen Salins has played crucial role in setting up palliative care units in reputed institutions like Tata Memorial Hospital and KMC Manipal and Bangalore Institute of Oncology. He is also the editor of Indian Journal of Palliative Care. So over to you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Manipal, India. Anubhuti, am I audible for the?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as we start this session, I thank everyone for joining on a Thursday afternoon. I know this is a working time within your hospital or in your clinic setting. And I really thank those who have taken interest to join. So over the next half an hour or so, I would be giving an overview about palliative care in COVID situation. And a lot I'll be speaking from my own experiences and some of the resources that we have created. And I'm very happy to take any questions from you or answer anything that would be relevant. So I would start my session and my presentation has two parts. The part one of the presentation where will talk about palliative care for serious COVID-19 patient. And in part two of my presentation, I will talk about impact of COVID-19 on palliative care and its adaptations. So let's look at the first part of my presentation, that is the palliative care for serious COVID-19 patient. So we will start with a live poll on a question that would interest you. And based upon the response of the poll, I would take this further. I would request the BMJ to conduct this poll and then I would start the next slide. So it's excellent that 91% of you felt that it's very relevant. And of course, it's very relevant. None of us have anticipated this pandemic. and close to 60,000 people in India have died because of this pandemic. So among those people who have died, there's a significantly high percentage of patients who probably would have benefited from the palliative care. So let's look into how it's going to be relevant and how it's going to benefit these patients. So for the first part of my presentation, I have used three different resources. In all these three resources, I was part of this resources in some capacity. The first one was we prepared a paper for Indian Journal of Critical Care, where we talked about symptom management and supportive care of serious COVID-19 patients and their families in India. You can access it freely from the website of the Indian Journal of Critical Care Medicine. It is a freely downloadable article. The second resource that what we I'm going to use for my presentation is a position statement that has been prepared on palliative care in coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. And the position statement, you can get it again freely from the Indian Journal of Palliative Care website. And the detailed description of the position statement is available from the palliative care website of Indian Association of Palliative Care, that is palliativecare.in. That is the website of Indian Association of Palliative Care, where you will find this resource. The third one is again a freely downloadable resource where we talked about the pathway to comfort, role of palliative care for serious COVID-19 illness. And you can download this resource from Indian Journal of Medical Sciences. So all the three resources are easily accessible and downloadable for your use. And I have based my talk on these three important resources. Basically, I've used very Indian resources because whatever I speak now, as majority of the attendees are from India, I'm trying to contextualize for the Indian setting. So, when we talk about palliative care for serious COVID-19 patients, before we start, we need to triage that who are those people who would benefit the most from palliative care in a COVID-19 situation. So, if you see here, there are four color coded ones, and those who would mostly benefit are the red and blue category. That is what we call immediate category and expectant category. So who comes under the immediate category, where the patients where survival is only possible with immediate treatment, or in an expectant category where survival is not possible given the care available. So in my clinical practice, I get most of the blue categories as referrals to palliative care, where we have patients with multi-system failure, with a long-standing comorbid illness, with a really bad COVID pneumonia, sepsis, where the survival may not be possible given the care available. And lot of these times, our palliative care services are integrated with either emergency medicine department, critical care medicine, or with the general medicine team. Now, the other category is that where survival is only possible with immediate treatment. Suppose if you are in a peripheral setting and you do not have access to a very immediate treatment, like a mechanical ventilation or another invasive intensive care measures, they are again the other category also probably where palliative care would be beneficial. I would take the second poll before I go to the presentation at large. And
Hello.
yeah,
Sir, I would like to interrupt you.
yeah,
Sir, we are not able to see your slide. Maybe you have forgotten to share your screen. Rina,
okay,
can you stop sharing the screen? Sir will now start sharing.
okay. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, sir.
Is it You can see the share
Yes,
screen now.
yes, sir. Now we can see. Now we can see.
Now you can see the screen.
Okay.
Okay. So you're
Thank you,
not
sir.
lost much. It's just that
Yes,
introducing
yes.
to the resources. So let's start with the second poll, and after the second poll, we will go to the next of my presentation. So this was the first poll question. So again, majority of the attendees have voted that its mechanical ventilation in serious COVID-19 patient is applicable to some based on their medical condition. Although when we started treating COVID in India, I think there was a lot of focus on mechanical ventilation. Even a lot of government policies were also directed at buying more ventilators. Soon there was so much of evidence that was emerging that said that probably mechanical ventilation is not always the panacea or the answer for everything and may not help in all the patients. So there has been a drastic shift in this trend where not all of them are subjected to mechanical ventilation or an invasive intensive care treatment. So before we talk about palliative care for serious COVID-19, the first thing that what we need to do is to assess what is called futility. So when you talk about futility, it means that whether a invasive intensive care intervention will provide a desired clinical outcome. So in a patient with a serious COVID-19, a desired clinical outcome is to come back to what the patient was before that patient had a COVID-like illness. So for that, there are certain guidelines that what we follow is that we look at whether this patient has got a high sequential organ failure. When we talk about SOFA score, it look at whether this patient has a multi-system or a multi-organ failure, whether the patient has got an irreversible shock, whether there is a progressive worsening of the neurological condition, there is an increase in the need for a ventilatory support, especially in the elderly age more than 80 years, they do very badly when they go on to the ventilation, or they have comorbid conditions like chronic kidney disease, ischemic heart disease, congestive cardiac failure, and whether it's in an end stage organ impairment like CKDs on dialysis, heart failure on multiple medication, advanced COPDs on oxygen, or patients with advanced cancer. And most important thing is the predicted outcome or the predicted survival is very poor. So whenever we get referral to palliative care from intensive care or emergency medicine, the first thing that we ask them, because as a palliative care physician, I'm not an expert to know what would be the outcome for this patient. So I ask this question to them. You tell us, what do you think is the outcome? Do you think that continuing or initiating slash continuing an intensive care treatment, is it going to help the patient? Is it going to be beneficial? So that is the first and the most important step. So before you provide palliative care or think about palliative care in a serious COVID-19, you start with talking to your colleagues, talking to the other doctors, and trying to ascertain that it is a medically futile condition. So once you ascertain that it's a medically futile condition, the next thing that you have to do is to conduct a family meeting. So why do you have to conduct a family meeting? Is to communicate. So what will you communicate to the family when you conduct the family meeting? The first and foremost thing that you will communicate is the nature of the current clinical condition, that it is a refractory to all the medical treatment, and it is in a critical phase in terms of the patient is clinically unstable, either hemodynamically unstable or oxygen requirements are going up or the neurological conditions is getting worse. So you talk about the critical nature of the illness, which is refractory to medical management. You talk about why you are having this family meeting. So normally I start and say that if the patient is going to get better with our treatment, we would not be having this conversation. But in these circumstances, this patient has got an end stage organ impairment like CKD, heart failure, or cancer, or other thing, and the things that are happening, which makes us think that probably continuing an aggressive intervention is unlikely to help this patient. So you talk about the fertility, you talk about the benefit versus burden. What would happen if we go on continuing the aggressive intensive care measures versus providing a comfort based supportive care? And you ask the families, what do they feel about this? Has the patient anytime expressed in the past as what kind of treatment the patient would like to receive should the patient go on to an intensive care? So you would try to explore from the family side what is that they are hoping in this situation, and never say nothing can be done. Always tell or speak to the family and tell that continuing aggressive measures or intensive care measures in this patient probably is not appropriate, not going to help. However, we can do this. So we can at least make sure that the patient does not have any breathlessness, pain, distress, suffering, and a lot of myths and misconceptions would be there. So we need to talk about these things, clarify these things, always ensure that there is consensus on the both the sides. There is a consensus from the healthcare provider side. That means the palliative care team, the intensive care team, the general medicine team, or the emergency team. Everybody thinks the same thing about the nature of care that is going to be provided or the futility of care. Same way, we do not want to have conflicts in the family. So we want to ensure that all the family members who are directly responsible for the family, for the patient, are on the same page, and they understand have the same information and understand the same aspects about the patient's illness, and so that there is a very clear communication that happens. And also you discuss the what is the meaning of palliative care in terms of how palliative care can assist this person in the dying and symptom management. So when we communicate, this are some of the things that I have borrowed from a website called vitaltalks.org, which again you can look in, where they give certain phrases that you should avoid and certain phrases that what you should use. Like there's nothing more we can do for the patient. Instead of that, we will do everything possible to take care of the patient, or we will do everything possible that is appropriate for the patient rather than using a negative. We always want to say that you should be strong or brave, or patient has fought bravely, rather than that acknowledging what is happening. We understand this is an emotional time. It's okay to be anxious. Don't worry, patient will die peacefully with these drugs. Avoid, instead of that, we will do best we can to see that patient is made comfortable or kept comfortable. You cannot be with your patient. It can be dangerous for you. You are talking in a very, actually in a nice way, because you want to protect the family members from contracting COVID. But rather than that, it could be said that, I'm sorry that you cannot have your loved one around you. We are doing everything possible to protect you while we are caring for your loved one. So we are just interchanging a few things. Basically, the concept still remains the same, but you are using those phrases that is more reassuring and comforting rather than some of the statements that is more daunting for the patients and families. And now you ascertain medical fertility, you have communicated to the patient. You need to categorize patients in terms of those patients who probably are not suitable for ventilation to a stable, unstable, and end of life. You have to categorize is that in patients who are in end of life, they will probably have very few hours or maybe few hours to days, whereas in patients with who are stable may have few days, and your aggressiveness of intervention in terms of providing end of life care and symptom management are should be most directed towards the patients who are at end of life. That means patients who have already developed an ARDS like picture, who are desaturating with a very low oxygen saturation levels. Okay, they are the ones who probably need more aggressive intervention. So that's why there is what is called as an early warning system, and this is a good exercise for all who are going to provide palliative care to know what is the EWS score or the early warning system score, and based on that categorizing the patients. So once you categorize, the next is to go on to managing symptoms. So there are important symptoms that what we need to manage is the first one is pain, second is breathlessness, third is delirium, and fourth is respiratory secretions. So these are the common symptoms experienced in any seriously ill patient who are in ICU or needing a very intensive care treatment. So let's come to the pain management. The first thing is patients who are stable, probably, who can talk or communicate, may be able to verbalize pain and they may be able to tell what is their pain scores. However, patients who are seriously ill, and some patients may be on intubated or they may have an altered sensorium or they are on an NIV mask, they may not be able to actually communicate and tell what is their pain or explain their pain scores. So we have to depend on what is called as a non-verbal descriptors. So when you talk about non-verbal descriptors, we look at the facial expression, we look at the upper limb, the limb movement, and also in ventilated patient, we look at the compliance with ventilation. Like facial expression, they may have grimacing or the muscles may become stiff, and they may be becoming more restless, agitated, picking clothes, and those on ventilator on an NIV, they may be fighting the ventilator or coughing and not tolerating it. So there is what we call it as a BPS score, that is a brief behavioral pain scores. BPS stands for behavioral pain score, and BPS score of more than 6 and above is what we call it as an unacceptable pain scores, which we need to intervene. And again, we categorize it as mild, moderate, and severe. Here I have used NRS, but as I said earlier, NRS is not always an accurate measure because NRS or numerical rating scale score is usually useful in people who are able to verbalize and communicate. So we try to avoid non-steroidal in COVID patients because of two reasons. One is that they could have a thrombotic risk is known with COVID-19, and NSAIDs can cause both thrombosis and bleeding risk. And second, we don't know how many of these patients have renal impairment, and we do not want to complicate the picture by giving an NSAID and causing a further renal damage. So mild pain is usually paracetamol, and sometimes if the patient has a neuropathic pain, then using gabapentin and titrating the doses of gabapentin. So as described earlier, is that they will share these slides with you. So all the doses are there in the slide. So I'll be going in a more superficial, in an overarching manner when I'm making the presentation. In moderate pain, technically we use a weak opioids, but in a seriously ill patient, even when they're having a moderate pain, we prefer to use a strong analgesic like morphine, but in a very, very small dose. Like you may start with 5 milligrams every fourth hourly, and you titrate the dose upward based upon their response and the extra pain medication that what they need, what we call it as breakthrough pain relief. If the patient is not able to take orally, then we use injectable morphine. And if the patient has renal failure, then we use fentanyl. So whenever we use these medications for pain, they commonly have some adverse effects in terms of nausea and vomiting and constipation. These are the two common adverse effects. And always we should anticipate these adverse effects and use metoclopramide for nausea and vomiting and bisacodyl for constipation. And when we have patient has very severe pain, we may have to use a much higher doses of morphine, and usually injectable morphine is preferred. These are some of the doses of injectable morphine that are used. Yeah. Other important symptom that patients experience is delirium. Any patients who are critically ill or in intensive care, they commonly develop delirium within a couple of days of intensive care treatment. And it can be very distressing because patients are very restless, and you can see in intensive care, common thing that we see is patients being tied to the bed, isn't it? Or harness put on them. So we have to understand, and it's very demotivating or distressing even for the families to see their loved ones not being able to communicate or being agitated or have to be tied or having a complete changes in their behavior. So this is one of the screening tool that what we use, uh, where we look at alertness of the patient, we look at their ability to state orient themselves by telling their age, date of birth, place, year, etc. We look at their attention, and we assess whether this is a new onset problem or whether it was there before. So if there is an acute change or a fluctuating course, that probably indicates more of a new onset thing. And based on that screening for delirium, you take a decision and say that yes, this is a new situation that needs and further attention. So again, you categorize and see whether it's a mild delirium or whether there is a delirium with agitation, or there is an agitation and restlessness without delirium. So if it is a mild delirium, then most often we give non-pharmacological treatment and try to reorient them, and maybe use a very small dose of haloperidol. A lot of non-pharmacological treatment like putting in a quiet room with less visual auditory excitation, avoiding physical restraint helps. But again, if delirium with agitation, then you require probably injectable doses. And there are many antipsychotic medication that helps delirium. And there are what we call typical and atypical, but usually in a very sick patient, typical antipsychotic like haloperidol works much better than the atypical ones. And benzodiazepines, as I said, is avoided normally in delirium, but If the agitation is too much, then you may have to add benzodiazepines like midazolam on top of haloperidol. And if the patient does not have features of delirium and if it's only restlessness, then maybe a small dose of oral lorazepam to start with, and if it's severe, to go with midazolam. The other symptom that patients with COVID can develop is breathlessness. They can develop a severe form of COVID pneumonia, which could lead to increased breathlessness. And it can also cause a lot of pulmonary congestions and things like high flow oxygen positioning the patient, cord flannel, some of the non-drug measure that we can use. But morphine can help in relieving the breathlessness significantly. I know many participants may feel that this patient is already breathless and morphine could cause a respiratory depression. That's not true, because if you're using a smaller dose and titrate it properly, it has a huge beneficial role in relieving the breathlessness. And when it's severe form of breathlessness, then probably you need to use a much larger dose and give it more frequently. And if a syringe driver is available, and if breathlessness is associated with a lot of anxiety and agitation, then we combine morphine and midazolam together. As mentioned for pain, anytime when we use morphine or any other opioid, we always have to anticipate nausea and vomiting and constipation and give corresponding medications for that. The fourth symptom that commonly that what we see is respiratory secretions, and a lot of times non-pharmacological methods help. That means you optimize the hydration, you give adequate doses of IV hydration. Most of the time, respiratory secretion is because of overhydration. The huge IV fluids would be running at very high rate, and in these patients, probably positioning helps, and oropharyngeal secretion, suctioning does not help much because 80% of the secretions are below the glottis level. So the suction catheter can only reach up to the glottis. And positioning in a lateral ligament position with a slightly head raised also helps. And pharmacological agents like what we commonly use is glycopyrrolate, zero point 0.2 milligram subcutaneously, 3 to 4 doses a day. And glycopyrrolate is one of the best medications because it does not cross the blood-brain barrier. If you use drugs like atropine or other medication, it has a chances of crossing the blood-brain barrier and then leading to delirium and other things. So glycopyrrolate is a much better choice of medication. So there is a possibility that your pain, your breathlessness, your delirium, three of them are not managed with whatever that you're doing, and patient can become very distressed and very agitated, and uh, can have extreme suffering because of that. And sometimes the only way of managing this suffering is to decrease the consciousness of the person or make the person more sedated. Your intention is not to push the patient into coma, but rather to overcome the distress caused by the symptom, which is not amenable for management. So usually we use benzodiazepines like midazolam, and you start with slightly higher doses of midazolam, like 10 to 15 milligram over 24 hours, and you keep titrating up the dose till you achieve a response. And sometimes midazolam alone is unable to achieve that response, and you may have to use another drug like phenobarbital, which uh, you start with the giving an 100 mg stat, and you may start in a lesser body weight person 400 mg or 24 hours, or you can start with 800 mg and titrate the dose up. And very, very rare occasion, this has happened 2 times in my lifetime, that we have to use an anesthetic agent like propofol for sedating the patient for an intractable symptom. And this is what we call in palliative care term as palliative sedation, which is the perfectly ethical and moral thing to do for the patient with intractable symptom. Patients who are at end of life, normally this is what we do, is you anticipate symptoms. Before you anticipate symptoms and give an anticipatory prescription, when you know that this patient is only for end of life, always review the prescription first and look at the prescription the patient is receiving and see what the patient is on and what the patient is going to receive. Is it going to help the patient in terms of managing the symptoms? So we provide an symptom checklist and we provide an anticipatory prescription plan. And this has now become our standard template that all the ICUs have. So that we do not want the patient to get a symptom and then they contact a palliative care team and then we give an advice and then it gets instituted, rather than you anticipate that these are the problems this patient could get and this is the treatment, so that there is no delay in giving any form of treatment. Second part of my presentation that I would like to bring in is what is the impact of COVID-19 on palliative care, and what are the adaptations the palliative care services that needs to do within this pandemic situation. Likewise, which have given certain resources that we have used for the presentation. For this part of my presentation, I've used three resources again from India. One was published in Cancer Research, Statistics and Treatment this year, where we talked about palliative care for advanced cancer patients in COVID-19 pandemic. The second resource that what we did was for management of sarcomas in COVID-19 and the adaptations that we did. So the palliative care adaptation done in sarcoma patients is very well can be extrapolated for other things. It was published in Indian Journal of Orthopedics, and the third one was ethics in decision making in a COVID-19 pandemic crisis. So these are some of the resources that I have used for this part of my presentation. So I have part of a study that we conducted in the May this year, where we wanted to see that how our palliative care services are prepared to handle pandemic. And we had sent out to over 300 centers and 78 centers participate in the survey. And more than this was in May 2020, nearly 4-5 months back. I'm sure now it is many of the centers would have had COVID cases, but even at May, 67% of the palliative care service had isolation facilities, 78% had clear SOPs for communication, and 73% had infection control policy. But majority of the staff members were very anxious. Their anxiety was they contracting the illness and transmitting it to their family members. And a lot of people who were working in the community were very anxious that they may not be able to achieve an adequate infection control. And a lot of palliative care workers were redeployed to other services. So these were some of the initial thing of how palliative care services were coping with the pandemic. So before I go on to the next part of my presentation, we'll break the monotony with a small poll and then I'll resume my presentation. So can I see the poll results? Yes. So 82% of them feels that it needs adaptation. And let's see what adaptations are needed. So if we look at what are the challenges in palliative care delivery, the first and foremost challenge is that patients are not able to access palliative care. Now the lockdown restrictions are easing. Previously, during the lockdown phase, patients were unable to access palliative care. The entire hospitals were restructuring themselves. For example, in our hospital, outpatients was shut for some period of time. Only emergency services were functioning. A lot of staff were redeployed for COVID duty. Patients were not getting essential medication, especially opioids. So they stopped taking their medication. Their symptoms became more. A lot of houses getting sealed down or the areas becoming containment zone. The amount of support they used to get socially and from the families start becoming less. There was a lot of stigmatization of illness. Patients did not want to report their symptoms with the fear that they would be tested for COVID and their information would be known public, and there's a lot of stigmatization. Overall, the continuity of the care got interrupted. So there was a huge adaptation that was needed to help these patients. This was an excellent article that came in Nature Oncology Reviews, and this is diagram is an adaptation from the original article that came. Is that the first thing what was done was the cancer management was prioritized. That means high priority patients were to get the cancer treatment first compared to those with the low priority. So what happened was because of this lack of resources, the lower priority patients stopped getting their cancer treatment. That means patients with metastatic cancer who are receiving palliative intent treatment, where uh, uh, those patients, their treatments were stopped. And even in certain patients with a modest improvement in survival, especially in solid tumors, their treatments also got curtailed. So, what was the outcome of this reorientation in cancer treatment? Is that a lot of these patients became palliative, otherwise, who would have been receiving the cancer treatment. So, these patients suddenly the load for palliative care became bigger because these patients who are receiving cancer treatment are no more receiving. So, there was a need to prioritize within the palliative care services that who are the high priority patients who need an urgent intervention compared to the low priority. The low priority were the one who had a very stable, well controlled symptom. They have all the medication, access to medication, and they were receiving some form of disease modifying treatment. But the high priority were the one who are probably very ill or terminally ill, dying patient, or who have got poorly controlled symptoms, or having some form of complication, some emergencies like a spinal cord compression, or they may have a bowel obstruction, who require either an hospital-based palliative care, which includes an inpatient admission, or a more aggressive symptom relief or a very urgent home care. So this was the first adaptation where you prioritize the care process and provide to those who need the most. The second adaptation is what we call is a shared strategy for palliative care. So shared is a mnemonic which stands for system of triaging, hospital policy, adequate uninterrupted supply of essential medication, providing resources, communication with empathy, and documentation. So the triaging was very important, that we had to triage patient according to their palliative care needs, screen patient at every entry point. We had maintained a screening register and a screening questionnaire to identify those who are at risk for COVID, having all the infection control practices, and starting teleconsultation services. So this was the first thing in the shared is the system of triaging. Second, is to have a hospital policy. So the COVID manual that was prepared in our hospital had, it was a 250-page document which clearly had one chapter on palliative and end of life care. And from the beginning, the hospital started with an end of life care policy for COVID, which helped the ICUs and emergencies and general medicines to start referring to palliative care for end of life care. So hospital policy had a clear-cut end-of-life care policy, a policy on teleconsultation, and a policy for adequate personal protective equipment for healthcare workers and home care team, so that everybody is protected. The third important thing is to ensure adequate and uninterrupted supply of essential medication. So we started to work with the pharmacies, that we were able to send the prescription to the pharmacies, and we haven't done the couriering or the posting the opioids, but the NDPS Act allows you to courier and post opioids. And other important thing is to guidelines on telemedicine prescription. As I'm speaking, the ICMR is coming up with a new telemedicine guidelines. The initial one was brought out by the Medical Council of India. Now it is being expanded in its scope, and a very detailed telemedicine guideline and a telemedicine prescription is going to come out very shortly. The fourth one is resources. So we try to make resources available in terms of human resources, where you have local general practitioners who are trained with palliative care, who can see the patients at home. You provide them some web-based resources. A lot of the patients are having a significant loss of income. So a lot of economic rehab also needs to go along with that. And continued communication, where you keep communicating about the goals of care, we keep communicating about the nature of care. Like yesterday, we had a patient who came with very sick, with a lung cancer, with very breathlessness. Although we suspected COVID, before the COVID result had come, we have discussed about the goals of care. And this patient was not to receive ventilation if the patient is to worsen. And even though the COVID came negative, the goals of care did not change, that this patient was not going to go into the ICU if the person gets. And clear cut documentation, because the ICU teams or the EMD teams should know is what is the patient's preferred choice of care, place of death, and the nature of care. So this is very important to have this adaptation and as a strategy. So I already see there are 26 questions in the chat box. So I will take uh, one by one as per the questions, so that I will be able to answer. We still have maybe 15 minutes or so to answer the question. The first question is asked is it possible only palliative care will help to combat COVID patient? um, Palliative care will play a hugely supportive role in combating COVID patient. But it is, I'm not able to understand the question, but uh, uh, patient with COVID requires full medical management. Only a small section of COVID patient who are not going to help with medical management or an intensive care treatment are only going to be appropriate to receive palliative care. Uh, can one do a fellowship in palliative care without MCI registration? Though it's not the purview of this today's discussion, the short answer is yes. What's the role of anesthetic medication like fentanyl? Fentanyl is, although used in anesthesia, it's not. It's used as a pain management, and in small percentage of patients where morphine is not going to be helpful, fentanyl is uh, helpful. Whether DEX is a good option for agitated, mechanically ventilated patients while weaning, the answer is yes. Although I don't have very less experience in using Dexmed for as a delirium medication. most of the patients that we manage with delirium will be in the ward, and haloperidol would be a better agent. However, during the weaning process, the answer is yes. Is it possible to accommodate patients in serious stages of breathlessness ventilator? The answer is that you need to assess utility. As I started the presentation, if the patient, if the treating team feels that continuing aggressive intensive care treatment is going to benefit the patient, yes, you should provide all form of aggressive treatment, including mechanical ventilation. However, if it's not going to help, then probably they are not. So one patient COVID affected was cured few days back, re-affected with COVID. Yes, the patients have a very transient immunity with COVID, and this phase could last from few weeks to few months as per studies. Yeah. I think that's a possibility. Another question is, what is your take on clonidine infusion for agitation? Yes, if you are working in a setup where you have all resources, I think you can use clonidine, but I would not advise for everyone, because clonidine can cause precipitous drop in the blood pressure and severe hypotension, and you require a lot of expertise in using clonidine. So I would not recommend. There is another question which has come is, can we use NIV as an option which is not suitable for mechanical ventilation? NIV is also a form of ventilation itself. So in sometimes what we do, what is called as a time limited trial. The time limited trial means that in some patients, when the families are not accepting for not ventilation or not accepting for no aggressive treatment, we tell them that let's try this middle path for some days and let's see what will be the response and how the patient will improve. And if the patient gets better, then we will go with the treatment. So it can be used as an option. And how can we anticipate action, if any, given for patient for? So basically asking whether morphine can cause compromised respiratory function in serious COVID patient. See, if a patient who is seriously ill due to COVID and is dying, okay, and if morphine is going to improve that breathlessness, okay, even if there is a very tiny remote possibility of a respiratory compromise, we accept it, because you are looking at a greater good of helping that patient's breathlessness. Otherwise, also this patient, even if you do not give morphine, this patient may still die, because patient has advanced COVID illness, but would probably die with more breathlessness. So answer is that we have to give, but we are giving a small dose, and we are going to titrate the dose, and we are going to monitor the patient. It's not that because the patient is breathless and it's a serious COVID and for only palliative care, you don't give a very high dose or an inappropriate dose. Domperidone can be given or not. I do not understand the context. It can be given if the patient has got nausea or vomiting. Can you tell about the role of heparin? Yes, COVID heparin has a role because of the increased thrombotic risk. It can be given either prophylactically or if the person has thrombosis. I am not able to understand about it's intractable symptom. Can you give me your view, please? As I said that normally for any symptoms, we provide a set symptom relief management. But as I said, 100% of those patients do not respond to these measures. And although 95% may respond, maybe 2 to 5% of them may continue to have symptoms. And this, not just having symptoms, they are very distressed because of these symptoms. And because they are so much distressed, you need to help or alleviate this distress, and reducing the consciousness or providing some form of sedation helps them to overcome these symptoms. So that's what we talk about, managing intractable symptoms. So what can we do if COVID-19 patient become agitated or violent? I have mentioned in my presentation that if it's a mild restlessness, you can start with lorazepam. But if the patient is severely agitated or violent, we may have to use midazolam to help the patient. Okay, I'm trying to skip some of the questions because they do not deal with the presentation. So there's an ethics question. When it comes to ethics and the family members denies the care, which could result in a positive way, then in case who should a doctor decide what is the best for the patient? So the primarily your duty of care is to the patient, and you talk to the, if the patient is able to participate in the discussion, that you should speak to the patient directly. But if the patient is unable to participate, then we follow what is called as a next of kin rule. That is, spouse is always the next of kin, and then comes the children. So we need to talk accordingly. How to break the news to relative or patient that's COVID positive? There is a breaking bad news strategy that is there. I probably, due to the lack of time, I can't discuss them. But if you could look into the breaking bad news strategy, there's something called SPIKES, SPIKES, strategy for breaking bad news, which is a better antiemetic, metoclopramide or ondansetron, depends upon the clinical setting, especially when you're using opioids and causing vomiting, metoclopramide is a much better thing. But if it's a toxin-induced vomiting, ondansetron helps. Can we use oral atropine eye drops instead of IV atropine as antisecretory? I do not advocate using atropine at all. Then because of it has the potency to cross blood-brain barrier, glycopyrrolate is the why couldn't we use continuous infusion of morphine and midazolam for breathlessness? Yes, we can use, but everyone may not have a syringe driver. So that's why we provided both the option of using an intermittent doses and the syringe driver. If you have a syringe driver, then it is better. Use of steroids in COVID-19 patients. Steroids is given part as COVID treatment based on the recovery trial finding. However, in a palliative care setting, in intractable breathlessness, especially if not dexamethasone, hydrocortisone definitely has a huge role in helping the breathlessness, especially due to when the breathlessness because of an inflammatory response. Geriatric palliative care issues poorly addressed during pandemic. I agree. Vulnerable population, especially the elderly, their care has been compromised, and probably the steps have to be taken. Importance of proning. I am not an ICU physician, but proning is the strategy that is used by the intensivists when they give high flow oxygen and during ventilation. Currently, resources are being diverted to take care of COVID. So many hospital system triaging is difficult. Agreed. Lot of the cancer patients have suffered a lot because of this, and their treatment has been compromised. So likewise, many chronic illnesses has been compromised. What about having a separate COVID-19 isolation setup for cancer patient and in an exclusive palliative care setting? It's a very good thought process, but you need to have resources within the hospital. So right now what we are doing is that those who are needing end-of-life care, we are using single rooms in our hospital to provide end-of-life care for them. But to having an exclusive ward, you need to have resources. Is morphine prescription sent on WhatsApp acceptable? Currently not. As per the Ministry of Health slash MCI guideline, opioids cannot be prescribed on a telemedicine. You can advise opioids, but a physical prescription has to be made, and the drugs has to be picked up from the hospital. We are trying with the ICMR to change some certain these things. Then we can take on. As juniors working in COVID ICU, communication issues are huge. Yes, it's very important. Uh, then I think we need to take it on. There is a website called vitaltalks.org, and it gives you a lot of communication strategies, especially that can help the junior doctor. How have you addressed this in the hospital? As I said, we started it by putting end of life care and palliative care in our hospital manual. That's one thing. Two, we had meetings with the general medicine, intensive care, and the emergency medicine, and we made palliative care as part of the COVID protocol. And the ICU team and general medicine teams are identifying patients who are probably futile in terms of continuing treatment, and they're referring to us. And we have prepared standard templates for family meeting, for documenting the consent for withholding life sustaining treatment, and also for fertility assessment and ratifying the fertility. We have prepared a standard template for anticipatory prescription, and we are having tele family meetings during these things. So that's how we have addressed in the hospital. Um, do we actively intervene with complicated COVID-19 against the background of hospice care? I'm not able to understand if the patient has an end-stage organ impairment or an advanced cancer with complication along with COVID-19, then if it's a medically futile, then you provide the most appropriate symptom relief. Palliative care team comprise of multidisciplinary. Yes, definitely it comprises a multidisciplinary approach, and all members of the team is important. There's somebody says, what is the option of physiotherapy in palliative care? Definitely they have a role, but we have a scarcity of the resources, and we do not want to unnecessarily expose people when they are not going to benefit. There's a question on clarity regarding legal issues related to consultation and prescription on telehealth platform. As I said, ICMR is coming up with the new guidelines. We have to look for that. I'm skipping some of the questions because either they were answered before or not pertaining to that. There's a question that you have mentioned 80 years and above perform poorly. Shouldn't we consider the pre-morbid functional status and current? Yes, as I said, that age is just one of the factors. The many set of factors that we need to consider for the fertility criteria, and we need to take. Which tools are currently used for assessment of physical? As I mentioned already in my presentation. Is there a limit or maximum dose of haloperidol in geriatric age group? Usually, I do not go more than 10 to 15 milligram. That's the ceiling that I have. Is giving palliative care at home for immunocompromised and better to avoid nosocomial or iatrogenic infection? Yes, a lot of patients are cared at home. And if it's possible, yes, that's a good option. Role for propofol, I have mentioned that it's in a very, very small percentage of patients. What are the responses from families to palliative care communication to COVID at your facility? So most of the patients, when we really clearly explain to them, you need to do a long communication. And sometimes this family meeting takes an hour or so, and clearly explain that why you are having this family meeting, and explain the futility of the treatment, explain the current situation and what is the benefit of doing a treatment versus not doing a treatment. And once they understand that your intention is noble and it's to help the patient, most of our patients accept it quite well, actually. So I think that's a that's a positive thing. Can a terminally ill or a COVID patient manage at home in a rural area? Yes, that's the objective, and maybe you need a local general practitioner who is competent and who is probably able to provide resources in terms of his time and to do some prescription. We can do that. How can an MBBS doctor help providing palliative care by doing a 3 months course? They can definitely, but probably they would need some degree of hand holding and mentorship when they are doing. There is no updation of palliative care guidelines except in Kerala state. Yeah, you can look into the Indian Association of Palliative Care. They have come up with position statement and lot of guidelines are there for symptom management. So that's something that is useful. So I tried to answer most of the questions as much as I can, and I thank you so much for all your participation and really appreciate that. And thank you BMJ for conducting this. BMJ also has an online palliative care course, which is a 3 month certificate course. And a lot of this information regarding providing palliative care, and some people have asked about certification also. That's something an useful course to look at, because the course content has been prepared by a cohort of international and national experts. For each topic, there's an international expert and a national expert who have prepared the entire course, and it's on an interactive platform. And there is some form of an assessment also, where you will get a certificate. So a lot of things that what we do in palliative care, you can learn virtually during this situation using the BMJ course. Thank you again. I hand it over back to the BMJ team.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful session. Requesting all the participants to share your feedback via email survey, which will be sent to you soon. Believe me, it will help us to shape our future events. We sincerely hope that we have met your academic expectations. So, sir has already talked about 3 month certification course in palliative care. This course will help doctors and nurses manage palliative care in an effective manner. This e-learning course is designed in such a manner that it will empower learners to learn at their own pace and convenience. So we are also offering scholarship for palliative course through our partners, NSF for students and NGO workers. So do visit our website educationindia.bmj.com, or you can write to marketingindia.bmj.com, or you may contact Mr. Aditya Tripathi for further information. So next week we have a webinar on CKD and COVID. So do join us next Thursday 3 to 4 p.m. So this brings us to the ends of today's webinar. And before we conclude, stay safe and God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.